I've wondered a lot long term what really is Elixir's place in everything. And I've kind of thought of it as, I guess, almost a glue language within like your general systems architecture. Because you brought up a great point that obviously for certain microservices, you would, just do them in the appropriate language for it. But I guess thinking about it, it's all like, what if Elixir was kind of the way to really connect those together and orchestrate things? I'm curious what you think about that.
I mean, I think of it in our systems as more of a general purpose language than that, like a good default. So more than just glue. I think more of a sensible default. What you're describing, I think it reminds me of RabbitMQ, and I'm not sure if you've used that much in the past. If you look at RabbitMQ versus other message bus software, I would just say Kafka, even though it's a bit different, but some people use it the same way. I like it because when I'm reading the docs, it's written from the perspective of an Erlang programmer. And so it just sort of like paradigms make sense to me. So I'm not sure how familiar you are with RabbitMQ, but
I've used it a lot. I do love the docs.
yes, I think you can only love the docs if you are already familiar with Erlang or you are already sort of bought into the whole idea of how Erlang primitives work. But to me, what's nice about it is I feel like I have a mental model of what the internals of RabbitMQ are before I even look at them, because I sort of understand how Erlang works and sort of just understand that it's built kind of in that mental framework. And so I'm not sure where I was going with that, but the point of it is like general purpose, like here's a message bus that's written in Erlang. I say Elixir, Erlang is, to me, they're sort of interchangeable, but here's a message bus, great solution for that. Here's a sort of a JavaScript framework, I guess, live view. I don't know what else to call it besides that, front end framework. And that's written in Elixir. And then here's a backend framework like Phoenix, or a web framework like Phoenix. And here's backend tools. And here's nerves. And here's some machine learning stuff. So like, to me, Elixir makes a great default language for architecting a system. And then when you get to that point that you were describing where you are willing to cede ergonomics for performance, then it makes sense to pull them out. But in staying in the middle of that spectrum of high performance and high ergonomics makes sense as a default until one of those two things doesn't meet your needs anymore. And then it makes more sense to me to isolate that and build that in some other language. I guess in the same way that I look at Postgres. Like what you know about your application today isn't going to bear any resemblance to what it is in 5 years from now, right? Like you think you know where the application is going in the next 5 years, but you don't. And so you're making decisions today for the long term. And so what database are you going to choose? And you can make a very opinionated choice and build it on a different database technology, thinking you're going to go a certain direction. But to me, I think Postgres is the choice. It's going to be the choice. It's got the most features and performance and extensions and improvements over time that you don't know where you're going to be in 5 years, but there's a good chance that Postgres is probably going to still be able to solve your problems. Let's look at Elixir in the same way. You don't know where you're going to be, but this is hopefully still going to get you 90% of the way there in 5 years from now, and you can make tweaks later on. But they used to say in the 80s, no one ever got fired for buying IBM. I don't know if you've ever heard that saying before. Maybe it was in the 70s. Yeah. So no one ever got fired for buying IBM. And I think it's like the same thing. No one ever got fired for choosing Postgres. And hopefully people can say the same thing about Elixir.
No, it's funny you make that analogy, because I have always seen Postgres as kind of a halfway between, let's say, like really relational graph DBs and then like NoSQL stuff, which is funny because Postgres can do both technically with the right extensions. So
yeah, I mean, if you look at a database like TimescaleDB is a wrapper around Postgres. So if you wanted like an event-driven or like a time-based database, like even TimescaleDB has chosen Postgres. And you're right, like what they did in, what version was that? 8.6 maybe, when they added JSON blobs. This was quite a while ago.
Yeah, 8 sounds right, yeah.
Yeah, so it's just like all of a sudden, oh yeah, remember all that denormalized data that you thought you needed Mongo for? Well, it turns out you really don't. Postgres supports that, and now Postgres indexes it, or can index it as well. And there's some pretty cool operators in Postgres, if you dig deep, to be able to query into those blobs without having to pull them into memory and query them in your application code. Yeah, big fan of Postgres. So if Postgres doesn't have it,
love to hear it.
Postgres doesn't have it yet is the way to think about it.